Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're doing well. I hope you're having a great day. And if your day's only starting right now, it's gonna be a great one. So this past weekend, the UFC took a break. Nothing happened, but this upcoming weekend, UFC Fight Night, Maycee Barber versus Erin Blanchfield, and this will serve as an appetizer for UFC 316, one of the biggest cards of the year, headlined by Merab Dvalishvili versus Sugar Sean O'Malley, the rematch for the UFC Bantamweight Championship. And yeah, basically in this video, just want to somewhat go through the Blanchfield and Barber card, and there is other few other things that I basically just want to speak on, and a massive problem within the UFC. Well, it might not be massive. Let's say a big, let's say a big problem within the UFC, and it might not even be big. Let's just say it is enough to to have your attention. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna say. So, prior to going into the video, just a friendly reminder, if you enjoy the video, to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, the notification bell. I would really appreciate it. It goes a long way. I will really appreciate you. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the video. So UFC Fight Night, Erin Blanchfield versus Maycee Barber. Now I'm just gonna rip off the band-aid, not gonna beat around the bush. Underwhelming. It could seriously be underwhelming. Now, luckily, that's just my opinion. It's not fate, because I had the exact same opinion about a fight card not too long ago, and that's gonna be a big talking point of this video. Is I felt the same way with Gilbert Burns versus Michael Morales. I looked through the card and I thought, yeah, this might be underwhelming as well. And then it ended up being, honestly, one of the best cards I've watched this year due to the performances. And I made a video about this, and you could just click on that link and it would take you to it. And it basically just went through, what makes a card great. You don't necessarily need these massive names on a card to determine whether the card was great or is great. Rather, if you have insane performances, the way that we had insane performances in the Gilbert Burns Michael Morales card, that would be enough. Because I would much rather watch a fight night card like that one, where every single fight, every fighter wants to impose their will on their opponent, wants to take risks, wants to finish the fight, rather than having a fight night card littered with superstars and it's underwhelming performance after underwhelming performance. Everybody knows that something is way worse when it has insane expectations and it doesn't live up to it, rather than having, mediocre expectations and not living up to it. And that's the thing, that once you have big names within the sport, if they have an underwhelming performance, it hits way harder than having a, I wouldn't say a no name. Let's be respectful. If you have someone that is average and he underperforms, then you're like, okay, well, he might need some time to, progress and evolve his mixed martial arts, so it's fine. And that's the thing. That's the big talking point. That's the massive, big, average problem that I want to talk about. Is the UFC wants superstars. They want big names. So the same that every sport wants big names, because it attracts more attention, it attracts more views, it brings more, spotlight on your sport. And then obviously with that comes the revenue that you make off of more eyes, more spectators, more fans, the works, right? The problem is, in order to become a UFC superstar, either you need the personality or you need to have the performance. And I only honestly think in one case we've had someone who had both. So you need either the personality, the Chael Sonnens of the world, the Colby Covingtons of the world. We can even use Bisping because his personality was insane within the UFC. Or you need the performances. The guys that don't necessarily have the personalities, but you do not care. If you went your entire life without hearing them speak, you would be fine. The guys that, like Alex Pereira, basically has the personality of a mailbox. Would you watch him fight? Absolutely, because every person he's fought, apart from Big Unk, ended up meeting their ancestors. or Israel Adesanya, one of the most decorated strikers in the UFC and in the UFC history, Anderson Silva, GSP, yeah, we could basically Demetrius Johnson, a lot of guys that don't necessarily, John Jones, don't necessarily have the personality, but their performances were so insane that you don't mind, you just want to watch them fight. And then you have Conor, who is kind of in, both, where he had the insane personality. He was polarizing because of a lot of shit that he said, and his performances, they were insane. We saw him knock out Eddie Alvarez. We saw him knock out Jose Aldo. We saw him take Nate Diaz to the distance. We saw him lose to Nate, beat Nate. We saw him in his performance against Cowboy Cerrone. We saw him knock out Dustin Poirier, and we also saw him on the mic absolutely ridiculing people. So Conor was somewhat both. But what I want to get to is the UFC wants superstars, but they're not incentivizing people to perform like superstars. So what I mean by that is winning inside of the UFC is not enough. It is not enough. In combat sports in general, it's not enough. It's not like a team sport or some individual sports where basically you win and you become massive. You become a, an icon, a figure within said sport. Just because in combat sports, there's not an inherent fan base that will just follow you. You have your family, you have your friends, but then once you come into the sport, you basically have to reinvent yourself inside of the sport. Where if you take team sports, for example, if you take football, Manchester United will always have fans because they have people that are born in Manchester, in that part of Manchester. They were born into a family of Man U fans. They are Man U fans. Okay, they don't have a choice. And a lot of diehard fans in a lot of sports, that is the case. Where nobody knows you once you step foot inside of the UFC. So winning isn't enough. And yeah, winning might end up getting you a belt. But once you lose that, once you lose the belt, you lose relevancy within the sport. And the UFC isn't incentivizing people to put on insane performances because the risk reward, it's just not enough. And we saw that, I think it was at UFC 300, Dana White raised the bonus to $300,000 for the person who got a performance bonus, performance of the night, fight of the night, whatever. And yeah, apart from the main event, co-main event, absolute whiff. Because people don't want to take the risk because the risk isn't worth the reward. Now you can think of UFC superstars and big names within the sport, past and present. You can think, well, isn't that reward enough? But that's the part we see. We don't see the guys that tried to do it and didn't make it. And I guarantee you, there are more of them than there are big names within the sport. Because right now, once you fight inside the UFC, let's say you fight, you get paid for fighting and you get paid for winning. So the UFC incentivizes winning rather than incentivizing someone to put on an impressive performance. If the UFC had a fight bonus and a stoppage bonus, it would incentivize both men to fight in a way where they want to finish their opponents, whether it be by knockout submission or doctor stoppage or whatever, don't care. Because all of them are the same. It's dominant, right? So if you have a rather than having a win bonus, you have a stoppage bonus, that would basically ensure that both fighters take risks within a fight. Both fighters have the incentive of wanting to finish the fight, put on an insane performance that goes along with finishing a fight, and that makes them more marketable. But now we have a win bonus. It's incentivizing people to win, not take any risks, and then basically it just ends up being an underwhelming performance. And you could justify a win bonus in the sport if the sport was judged equally. Now, this what I'm about to say might be controversial. I don't think it is. I genuinely hope that this is the general consensus. Not every martial art is judged equally within the UFC. And that, I think, is a fact. Striking is not judged the same as wrestling, is not judged the same as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Wrestling has the upper hand in judging. And that, I think, that is an objective fact. Once you have a wrestler and a striker fight, as soon as the wrestler steps foot inside the octagon, he already has an advantage because wrestling is just favored with regards to judging. If you, for example, if you had fighter A, fighter B, B is the wrestler, A is the striker, if they have a fight, a let's say 1 round fight, and for 2.5 minutes out of the 5 minutes, the striker is piecing up the wrestler. He is piecing him up. He opens him up. He has some blood dripping from his face, and the striker has landed good shots. Now, he hasn't knocked him down, but he's landed good shots to the extent where you would think wouldn't want to eat those shots. And exactly at the halfway mark of that round, the wrestler takes down the striker and basically just lies on him for 2.5 minutes and doesn't do anything. Basically serves as a wet blanket, just covering the striker, and lies on him. Guarantee you that round would go to the wrestler. I would basically bet my uncle that that round would go to the wrestler when it shouldn't, because the striker did more damage, it also imposed his will. For 2.5 minutes, the fight played out on his terms. The other half was on the wrestler's terms. So it's basically even, except the striker did more damage. I think damage is probably should be the biggest criteria in judging a fight. The striker should win that round. I could basically use the exact same example with someone who does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and a wrestler. Let's say the round starts. The wrestler immediately takes down the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy. And in 5 rounds, the wrestler has control. Apart from 3 times where the BJJ guy has the wrestler either in, let's say a guillotine, let's say two triangles, potential, submissions that looks deep, but at the end the wrestler got out and continued to basically just lay on the BJJ guy and basically just wet blanketed him, controlled him. Who was in more danger? The wrestler was in more danger. Yet guarantee you once again he would win that fight. He would win that round. So the sport, the incentive is on winning, but the sport isn't judged equally. So you can't incentivize people to win because it's not fair. Because it's not judged equally. The wrestler have the advantage. That's why you see a lot of people right now who has a strong wrestling base doesn't use it as a mean to finish a fight. Basically just use it to play safe, because that's the safest place you could be, is controlling your opponent without trying to progress with regards to the position, without taking any risks. That's the safest place you could be. And the UFC is incentivizing it, because if you do that, you will win the fight and you will get paid more. So incentivize them to finish fights. Now you will get the fights where, once again, Gilbert Burns, Michael Morales, we saw Julian Erosa versus Melquizael Costa. That fight went the distance, saw the judges, and it was an insane fight. You could probably end up watching 15 rounds of that fight. Now, both Erosa and Costa would cease to exist if they had to go 15 rounds, but there wasn't a stoppage. So what would you do then? I don't know. But I'd pay both of them then, as if there was a stoppage. Their win bonus, the fighter that would have received the win bonus, take that win bonus, multiply it by 2. The UFC has enough money, give it to both fighters in a fight like that. But yeah, we need to have insane performances if we don't have big names. So either we have big names or we have insane performances. We cannot do without either. We cannot have no big names and horrible performances. So incentivize the fighters to fight in a way that they want to finish their opponents. We'd have better women fights as well, because a lot of women now within the UFC, the women that take risks and actually ends up knocking out their opponents, just become way bigger within the sport, because it's something we don't see often in women's mixed martial arts. That's why a lot of fans, like to see it. It's because it's different. It's because it is somewhat of an anomaly, and fans like seeing something that is an anomaly. So yeah, and with regards to this card, we have Maycee, Barber, and Erin Blanchfield. Honest opinion, Matthias Gamrot versus Ludovic Klein could have been the main event. Should have been the main event. Okay, once we get women's UFC, now I'm all for equality, feminism, all for it. But we have to be fair about this. If we took a women's an unranked women's bantamweight fight, and we took an unranked men's bantamweight fight, which one do you think would be better to watch, would be more exciting, more captivating? Now, before you say, yeah, obviously, duh, because it's men, I have seen insane woman fights. Basically, every single Amanda Nunes fight is insane, because she wants to finish her opponents, because she has finished her opponents. That is the big issue. Is women don't want to take the risk because they're incentivized to win. So once you get a good woman inside of the UFC that has good wrestling, she'll basically just use that and win. Do we want to watch that? And now people say, well, if you don't like wrestling, then go watch kickboxing. What? I'm a fan of Habib. I'm a fan of Islam. Okay, two of the best wrestlers probably ever seen in the sport. Okay, even though I'm not as big of a fan as Hamzat, I could appreciate Hamzat fighting because he is insane. Once again, what's the common denominator? They finish their opponents. They want to finish their opponents. They inflict massive damage on their opponents. It's not the wrestling that people have an issue with. It is the wrestling not being a means to either finish your opponent via KO or ground and pound, or finish your opponent via jiu-jitsu, via submissions, or that is the problem that people have with wrestling. Is because it has the benefit of being scored better by the judges, and a lot of people use it to their advantage when it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be an advantage. Okay, that is basically it. And for one, I do not remember what I was talking about prior to saying what I just said. But oh yeah, Gamrot and Klein could have been the main event. Have Maycee Barber versus Erin Blanchfield as the co-main event, and start having women fights. Incentivize them to finish their opponents, and it would get way better. We saw in the previous card, every single woman's fight ended via stoppage. It was insane. Loved it. Apart from one, I think, yeah, the what is it? Pennington, not Raquel. Tatiana. Yeah. Wait. Tisha. Tisha was her fight was the only one where no one got finished, but it was still the same because they threw leather and they stood on their punches. They threw with intent. It was fun to watch, but not every woman's fight is like that. So basically, Maycee Barber and Erin Blanchfield co-main, but then we have the Dustin Jacobys, Bruno Lopez of the world. Todorovic is fighting, and Zachary Reese I think is fighting as well. So we could see this card flourish, but then we will have to see the insane performances. And I think the UFC has to do something about incentivizing people to, rather than look for a win, because this isn't the same as any other sport. Just a win wouldn't suffice. We saw a person winning his whole life. Bilal Muhammad became welterweight champion. Yeah, he has had a good career within the sport, and I don't think he's done with the sport. I think there's still a lot left for Bilal, but his fame is basically directly linked to his belt. Now he lost the belt, and you'll see. Okay, we won't see, but the numbers will definitely show. Once Bilal doesn't fight for the belt, the numbers will be significantly lower, just because he is a guy that throughout his entire UFC career, the focal point was winning rather than putting on an insane performance. Where you could basically take any Justin Gaethje fight ever. It's not because he has an insane personality, and it's not because he is the best. It is because his performances are insane. The same applies to Dustin Poirier, where you know if you watch them fight, someone is gonna get sent to the Shadow Realm, and that is why people watch those fights because of the performances. Bilal doesn't and hadn't had those performances throughout his entire career, so it's just way more difficult for the UFC to market Bilal rather than marketing someone like Jack Della Maddalena, who is an insane boxer, who is an insane striker, who has knockout wins. So yeah, let's incentivize people to dominate their opponents instead of just winning via wet blanket.